Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here to give you my final verdict on the new Tamron 100-400mm f4.5 to 6.3 DI-VC USD lens. This, of course, is Tamron's newest lens in the affordable kind of telephoto category. And they are, of course, following up very successful releases of 150 to 600 millimeter lenses, both the original VC lens that kind of launched this whole category of quality yet affordable telephoto zoom lenses. They followed that up with the 150 to 600 millimeter G2 lens last year. Now this, of course, comes on the heels of Sigma releasing a 100 to 400 millimeter contemporary lens and earlier in the spring this year, which proved to be an excellent lens optically that I was really impressed by. However, I didn't feel like it held up to kind of the necessary autofocus speed that's going to be needed for shooting kind of high action events, birds in flight, some sports, maybe just wildlife in general, or it just could be, people that want to track their kids. And as a result, I didn't feel that it was quite there, particularly when I compared it to the much more premium Canon 100-400L Mark II. And so I've benchmarked the Tamron against that very same lens, the Canon lens, to see how it holds up in those kinds of comparisons. First of all, if you haven't seen my segment where I took a first look and looked at the build quality, I would encourage you to take a look at that here. But just to highlight a couple of things, this is a mostly magnesium body, and so there's lots of metal in the construction. It does have weather sealing, and everything works quite nicely here. And there's a zoom lock there, which of course is a welcome feature. The actual manual focus ring moves nicely. The zoom ring moves nice and smooth. Everything is positive there. Just two switches, and the focus limiter is actually worked into the AF/MF switch, and so and you're going to be able to tweak that distance for the focus limiter in the Tamron tap-in console, which this lens is compatible with. And so certainly interesting there. One thing that I noted that was a pretty huge oversight for Sigma is that it did not include any kind of tripod collar, nor was it really designed, at least what I could tell, to be used with a tripod collar, which is a challenge. A lot of people that are going to use a lens like this are going to want to have a tripod collar, and so I know of a lot of people, just in terms of the feedback that came to me, of people saying, you know what, I was interested in the lens, but I need to have a tripod collar. And so Tamron, while it also does not include a tripod collar, it is designed from the ground up for a tripod collar to be used with the lens. Tamron has elected probably to keep the cost down, I suspect, to make that tripod collar an additional accessory that's going to set you back about 130 bucks. However, at least the lens itself is designed for it, and of course, even when adding the tripod collar, you're still really undercutting the competing lenses other than the Sigma in terms of price. And so some interesting things there in the overall build quality. Now, and another subsequent episode, we took a look at the image quality from the lens, and most things there are quite positive. One, again, in comparing it to the Sigma, while the Sigma is outstanding optically, very nice color, contrast, good sharpness across the range, the Tamron is similar to that. However, it does have a little bit of an advantage in that on the wide end, the aperture opens up to f4.5 rather than f5. And while the lens doesn't quite keep up in terms of maintaining larger apertures throughout the zoom range like the Canon 100-400L Mark II does, which, by the way, the Canon is the best in the bunch by a pretty fair margin in that, even against other first-party competitors. Canon does a really good job, and it's not till around 312 millimeters that it actually arrives at f5.6. So the Tamron isn't quite as good as that. But compared to the Sigma at many different aperture values until you reach f6.3, it actually allows more light across a good portion of the frame. So that's a bit of an advantage. It just means that there's going to be some situations you're going to be able to keep the ISO down a little bit. And maybe even more importantly, in some venues where having a larger aperture means having a little bit better autofocus quality, like in dimly lit situations, the Tamron's a little bit extra light advantage, light gathering potential may be an asset there for that. But I would encourage you to take a look at the image quality segment here and just catch all the details about that. The good news is, though, is that other than the Canon having a little bit better contrast maybe, and that light gathering potential, there is the Tamron is actually just as good across the frame, and so a very strong performance from a lens that retails at $799 US instead of $2099 US, and so certainly very intriguing there. One advantage that the Tamron has, and which by the way the Sigma has also over the Canon, is that the Canon is very guilty of some fairly significant focus breathing. And so it's really not until about 60 feet plus that you're going to get a true 400 millimeters on the long end. And at distances closer than that, I could really notice when I was doing side-by-side comparisons that the Canon breathes quite a bit. In fact, if you look at this comparison, you can see that at closer distances, this is 400 millimeters at a distance of about 15 to 17 feet. There's a pretty significant difference in the framing. And I noted this during my testing of the VC of the two lenses, and I found that they both achieved basically almost identical results in terms of the image stabilization, and so you're really not losing anything when it comes to the Tamron. There was, at 1/25 of a second, I achieved basically the same. In the middle segment, I believe I got one more keeper with the Canon at 1/15, but when I took it down to 1/10, I got one more keeper by comparison with the Tamron. And so, not enough variation between either lens to really make that a difference maker. And in fact, if you look at this little video segment here, we'll see how it handles video AF or video VC as well. So here we're trying to handhold 400 millimeters. As you can see, it's not all that easy. So now we're going to turn the VC on. Pretty amazing right now. If you lock it in and you get it holding, it can really stabilize that. Pretty amazing. So you can see in that segment that it certainly makes a huge difference, and so it is going to be effective for video as well. Just note that 400 millimeters, even with great VC, if you're shooting handheld video, you're going to get some movement as a part of it. But we saw that if the VC is able to kind of lock on to a point of focus, it can really hang on to that and do quite a strong job in stabilizing the image at that point. And so some really positives there also. I also did a third segment where we took a look at the autofocus accuracy as well as the tracking ability. I would encourage you, if you want kind of more detail, to take a look at that episode here. But what I found there is that, number one, right out of the box on both a Canon 5D Mark IV and a Canon 80D APS-C body, I had very good focus accuracy right out of the box. I eventually did a very minor 1 to 2 point calibration on the wide end at 100 millimeters, but at 400 millimeters, I was basically dialed in with both camera bodies. That's very promising for a third-party lens. And I found that my autofocus accuracy during my review period was actually excellent. So kudos to Tamron on that. Perhaps even more importantly, when I went out and I began to do action sequences and tracking sequences, I found that the Tamron did a pretty great job of keeping up. I still give a very slight edge to the Canon with, of course, its far more expensive, but also first-party autofocus system. And I felt like it had a minor advantage in tracking action when I shot side by side. But in terms of the actual focus acquisition speed, I found that the Tamron was able to lock focus basically just as instantly as the Canon did. And, and in terms of tracking, it actually did quite a good job. And so I would suspect with, even more familiarity with the lens and maybe setting up the tracking parameters within the camera, I could probably produce even better results over time. And so I'm happy to say that unlike the Sigma, I don't really have reservations about the tracking ability of this Tamron lens. I think that for most people, it's going to get the job done. And so that is certainly a relief, because that was my main concern going into this. After the Sigma, I expected the Tamron to be excellent optically, which it is. But I was hoping that Tamron would be able to manage a stronger autofocus performance, and it certainly seems like they have. And so, a lot to commend there. So across the board in all the major metrics, I think that this lens is going to offer up some of the best bang for the buck in this class of any lens that I've seen. At $799 US, this is a lot of lens for that kind of money, and it works really, really well. The first-party Canon lens still has a couple of minor edges, but there's also a few categories where the Tamron actually has a bit of an edge, so there is some give and take. And for those of you that are value conscious, it's really hard to argue against an $800 lens that is competing in a $2,000 category that does so many things as well as what the new Tamron 100-400mm VC lens does. If you'll take a look in the description down below, you can find linkage to purchasing the lens, to my full written review, and to image galleries that have a lot of samples there to look at, both on full frame and APS-C. And yes, the lens survives the transition to APS-C just fine, as did the Sigma for that matter. Image quality is still quite good, and so I mean, there's no real major reservations, no real red flags that I observed during my review process. All in all, this is a really strong performance from Tamron. I'm Dustin Abbott. You can also find in that description down below to follow me on social media, become one of my patrons. And of course, if you haven't already, please click that subscribe button. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.